Welcome to the Marriage Puzzle Podcast with Juli and Thomas Hobby. We are marriage coaches who help couples with pain points about money, intimacy, and communication go from being overwhelmed to being secure in their marriage.
If this is your first time listening to us, thanks for checking out our podcast. And don't forget to subscribe and leave us a rating and a review. Let's dive into this episode.
Hey everybody, we're talking about chapter 4 in the book From This Day Forward from Craig and Amy Groeschel. And the chapter is called Stay Pure. So today we have 3 takeaways from this chapter of how you can remain faithful to your spouse in your marriage.
Yeah, and I think the way that I've kind of interpreted this chapter is, yes, staying faithful, but also protecting your marriage. So, like, there's what I have to do as my side of the marriage and what we have to collectively do to, keep outside influences from being able to damage our marriage or being able to tempt either of us in any way. So that's kind of how I viewed this chapter as we went through it.
Yeah, I would say even being faithful to your spouse is beyond just committing adultery. Like, it's those little things along the way that saying, I choose you from this day forward, like time and time again. So I love that you said protecting your marriage. So
yeah, like what I just want to add on to what you said, like, I choose you, almost kind of like the movie 50 First Dates. Like, every day you're waking up choosing your spouse again, that's who you're there for. And so I think that there's something about that, like every day waking up saying, like, yes, we've talked about that on previous podcasts, right? Like, every day that you wake up together is another day that, I chose to be here again. Like, in all reality, you do have the choice and the freedom to not that that's something we're encouraging, but, so you should count it as a blessing and a privilege that your spouse chooses you again every day. And so you should want to protect that and want to make them want to choose you, want to make it easy for them to want to choose you every day.
Yeah. So the first way you can do that in your marriage is to build guardrails in daily interactions. So what are some practical ways we do that? Yeah,
I think that some things you can do are just, Craig talks about it a little bit, some things that he does to kind of limit his interactions. But, I think just basically one of the big things that we've tried to start doing, and I wouldn't say we did this from the beginning of our marriage, but it was something that we learned and then we've really stuck to it, is making sure that we're not alone with someone of the opposite sex, or like riding in a car or anything like that. Since we made that decision to do that, have those things happened? Probably, but we're very in communication on the front end about that. Like, you're taking an Uber from the airport, you kind of get stuck with who you get stuck with, and but it's a very like, hey, I'm gonna call you while I'm in the car, or I'm texting you the whole time, letting you know the situation that's going on. Uber even, as that specific example, has the ability to share, your location. So I think there's even that as well, to just try and add those extra layers of safeguarding, guardrails.
I think that's really played out too in like work environments. Because you may not think about this. Like, I'll go to lunch with somebody and then like see another table with a male and a female. They're maybe having a work meeting, but they're not married to each other. And I'm always surprised by that and realize like that's common. That's, something. And so understand that could be your situation. But we do try, I guess, different in a public setting and things like that. Or is there a third person that could come along?
Right.
Or in that drives separate cars and things. So it's like you said, that kind of ties into the second one of the power of transparency and open communication. So first you have the guardrails. What are those? Try to draw the line in the sand and hold to it. When there's like, I have to go to this job interview and it's at coffee with this one person, like, what do you want me to say no to this opportunity? Right. I'm then falling into the second one of, I have full transparency with you and I'm in this open, constant communication of where I am, who I'm with, how it's going.
Yeah, and I think going back to the first one for just a second, the guardrails are something that you have to decide to do together. You guys have to together as a couple decide what are our boundaries going to be for situations like this so that we can help each other protect our marriage, so that we're not putting each other in a situation. Like, you don't want to, unfortunately, I think there are so many things in marriage and in life that can be weaponized against the spouse these days. And it's so easy to get out of a marriage that sometimes people are just looking for that excuse to get out. And so I think that this is one of those things where setting up the guardrails, setting up the boundaries, being transparent is going to be the harder route. But if you really truly love this person, you need to take the harder route. And I think that setting up those boundaries, you have to do it in a fair, but also a firm way. Like, you're not, setting up a soft boundary that can easily be broken anytime, but a firm boundary that's fair. Like, that was a perfect example you gave of like a job interview. Like, you shouldn't set, maybe you should for your marriage, maybe someone else should for their marriage, but in our marriage, I don't think it would be fair to set a rule that would be like no exceptions to this rule whatsoever. I think you can have certain things where it's like, hey, if I have to have this job interview, I'd like it to be in a public place. That's great. I need to be able to let my husband know where it's gonna be, so that he knows exactly where I'm at. Things like that, where it can be fair. It can. What I'm trying to get to is, you don't want to weaponize it in a way where you're trying to set your spouse up to fail to give you an out of the marriage. That's what you don't want. You want to set it up in a way that can be accomplished, but in number 2, with the transparency, you're talking about those things beforehand. Hey, I've got this job interview. Let's stick on this example for now. That is with, this person. I don't know if anybody else is going to be there. They haven't told me that. I don't know if I feel right asking for someone else to be there, if that's going to, give me put me on the bottom of the pile of the resumes,
Right.
by doing something like that, making it more inconvenient for them. And so, I think talking about that on the front end and then collectively making a decision, like, is this the right thing we want to do? Do we want to allow this to potentially, enter our marriage? If you both think it's okay, that's great. That's where the transparency comes in. And I think that the transparency side needs to be as frequent and, upfront as possible. And then when those things just happen, it's immediately afterwards that you're bringing something up.
Right. I think I used the job interview example because it's kind of just like a one-time, one-off thing.
Right.
Whereas, we used to go to lunch together. We worked together before we were married, before we were dating. We worked together. And so we both had a lunch break and we would go out to eat together. And it was just early on that I'm like, is this a date, or are we just both on a lunch break going to lunch together? So I just think back on that, and it was okay and innocent then. But as I'm married now, it's not like, oh, I have a lunch break and he has a lunch break, so we're going to consistently go to the restaurant together. I think that's where, like, I draw the line now.
Right.
And I'm like, okay, this is a job interview and I'm doing this meeting, but just my coworker going to lunch off site every day or every week, whatever, that's a little bit too comfortable when I'm married.
Well,
Not
and
to that person.
whereas you may be totally fine in your mind being like, yeah, this is just lunch. I'm going to lunch, you're going to lunch. What's the big deal? But in their mind, whether they're single or married, they could be thinking, is this a date? Like you and I did before we were even dating. And if they start thinking those things, then you have to wonder, like, okay, what's really happening here? Like, if they start thinking those, then that's when the boundary is going to start to get crossed. And it may not even be your fault,
Right.
but you're allowing it to happen. So you have to set those guardrails.
I know we're kind of going back and forth with 1 and 2, but 2, the power of transparency and open communication. I think of examples that's been even recent in our marriage of a guy who needed to talk to me. So 1 even asked you can I call your wife? Like, he texted you, is it okay if I call Julie? And I think like that was cool because you were like, yes, of course, but he respected you and me and our marriage enough to, ask permission. But
and
just
his marriage.
that's very true. And so there's that. Or not that I expect that from all guys and be like, you have to ask my husband first, like you have to ask my dad, like
Right.
it's not that. But just knowing then, there's another guy that's a mutual friend of ours that also needed to call me about something, but he didn't just like randomly call me and say, hey, what's going on, and we chit chat. He texted to make it, hey, are you available to talk?
Mm-hmm.
And I often like will screenshot those text messages and like, yep, I can at 12:30, and it's just, innocent. I know why he's calling, but I'll screenshot that and send it to you, and you're like, cool. So I'm not even asking permission, but it's that open communication, transparency that I feel so much better about. It'd be like clean conscious, just like, hey, FYI, or if they do call, then I'm like, hey, so-and-so called today. This is what we talked about. Like, I'm excited to tell you about all the like texts and calls and email interactions so that it's not like ever questioned of me.
Yeah, well, I mean, another example from my side is, we have a friend who we worked with back when we lived in Colorado, and, from time to time, we still interact with her, and, she's still running a great business out there and things like that. But, if there's something that I have to say to her about, I see an Instagram post and I'm like, hey, this is, what you're doing is great. Oftentimes I'll just add you to a group message before I send it. So that way it's like, you're included. She knows that I'm including you, and it's nothing, but I think it's okay in that regard for me to have a thought, to congratulate someone on something or something like that. And I think it's totally fine and appropriate because I'm including you on the message to make sure, because again, I respect her marriage as well, and her husband, and it's, I don't want to be sending those messages one off, but when I include you, I think that makes it a safe environment for myself and for this other person, to make sure that there's that transparency on all fronts.
Yeah, I think it brings it to like something you would say if all three of us or a group of us were standing there, and it's totally appropriate. What could cross the line, when in regards to being faithful in your marriage, is when it looks like or becomes this off like private conversation, and then you can kind of feel like maybe then you're trying to hide it or this or that, or if you're like some people can just even see that going into number 3, like identifying emotional triggers that could even trigger somebody, like, why are you texting somebody? And then then you kind of get on the defense, like, why are you asking me?
Right.
We've just decided to like, hey, like you said, group text messages, screenshot, heads up, or this happened. Like, we're just constantly in the communication so that hopefully we're not at fault, and we don't have those stumbling blocks or triggers. So, emotional triggers. You want to speak to that?
Yeah, I think emotional triggers can be a few different things. I think it can be what you just talked about, but I think it can also come from internally in the marriage. And, we've talked about this a lot on previous episodes, but about communicating with your spouse about when you're not feeling fulfilled in the marriage in some way, whether that's just in general connection, whether that's in the intimacy department, if anything is lacking, that opens the door to temptations coming from somewhere else. And so I think if you're not having that transparency with your spouse about what those emotional triggers can be, how are they going to know to help to pick up the slack in those areas? And so if you're allowing that to happen, naturally you're going to be tempted more from other areas, which can, start as something really small and then grow into a major thing. And, one of the points that they make in the book is that, even small things from a biblical perspective are still adultery. And so, you have to really be aware of that and really guard yourself against that. And some of that goes from within your own marriage.
So I think if someone's struggling to be like, okay, I didn't do this. I didn't, build guardrails. We don't yet have open communication, that transparency, so maybe you have broken trust that you're rebuilding. Then maybe even start with 3 here and identifying those emotional triggers. And it's going to be a hard conversation with your spouse.
Yeah.
But rather that than be caught in something.
Right.
Caught in adultery, caught in looking at stuff you're not supposed to, talking with someone just be like, let's talk and open up and sharing some struggles that we can all have, wandering eyes, wandering hearts, wandering minds. So not to put that on your spouse to say like, I need this from you, but like, hey, I have these needs and I married you. I want us to fill our needs together. And how do we do that? We're on the same team. And so, together we can be faithful in our marriage to just kind of express that and move closer together with filling each other's needs than trying to, like you said, find them elsewhere and just putting up those walls in your marriage.
Yeah, I have a couple things to say around this. One, I think you have to choose your hard, right? You said it's going to be a hard conversation. Well, choose your hard. Either have the hard conversation or have like on the front end about trying to protect your marriage, or have the hard conversation on the back end after something's happened when you're probably going to be nearing the edge of divorce.
Yeah.
What's your hard that you're going to choose? And I think when you put it in perspective like that, it's it makes those conversations on the front end a lot easier, especially if you frame them, like you just said, from an I perspective, not a you perspective. If you frame it as accusatory towards your spouse, you're not meeting these needs for me, well, then it's going to be a hard conversation. If you frame it as like, I have this is going through my mind, I need you to know about it, then it's putting it on you, and they're a lot more willing to help and assist rather than having something demanded of them. And so I think that's really key to make sure that you're having that open communication. So thanks for tuning in. Make sure you check us out on social media at Marriage Puzzle. Go check out our YouTube channel. If you're already watching this video on YouTube, thanks for checking it out. Click like, subscribe, and we will see you next time.
See ya.